This is TWiT.
Samsung held its big event, its Galaxy event, just yesterday in San Francisco. I actually did live coverage at the TWiT studio, the comfort of the TWiT studio. But this is the Samsung Unpacked 2023. And this time we got some new phones, yes. We also got some new laptops. And Michael Fisher, a.k.a. Mr. Mobile, was at the event and is here to talk about the announcements and his initial thoughts of some of the hardware. It's great to have you back, Michael. Welcome.
Very happy to be back, Jason and Micah. Thank you very much for having me. I'm back in San Francisco for the first time in a very long time, and I'm feeling very good about it.
I got to say, you're staying in a nice hotel room. That thing looks swank.
The Clancy. It's fancy. We do a nice job here.
The fancy
Clancy. Love it. Cool. Well, what better place for you to have a phone as, as fancy in and of itself as the Samsung Galaxy S23 Ultra, which, if I'm not mistaken, you have in your hands right now.
I do indeed. It is the cream colorway, which means I have some gold rails, which don't really read on this camera here, but believe me, it is very nice. It's much nicer in person than you might expect, having seen the renders and the photos, because it kind of looks like last year's model a lot. But yeah, as usual, you have to experience it to understand it, right?
Yeah, I mean, Samsung, year after year, it's one of the things that I appreciate about Samsung. Actually, it's something that I appreciate about OnePlus as well. That's a story for another day. Is their commitment, their dedication to the design, right? First and foremost, Samsung phones are just beautiful when you've got them in your hand, and I mean, you're paying a price for that beauty, especially with the Ultra. It's a pricey device, but what do you think about the design touches? I mean, it seems in some ways that these phones compared to last year are in many ways incremental. What's your thought?
You're absolutely right. I was interviewed a couple times at the Experience Center yesterday by some of my friends who are also reporters, and they asked, one of them, Nirav, asked me for a one-word description. I said iterative, because it is one of those years. It's not a revolutionary hardware shift. But again, like when you get it in your hand, it is very, very different, not least of all because they've taken an already boxy design in the Ultra and boxified it some more, which will make a particular stripe of nerd very happy, because many people complain that these curved screen edges are not the ergonomic win that Samsung has always talked about, and B, make it more difficult to use the included S Pen. And so a boxier design this year actually solves both of those problems. And it's pretty cool, even after 30 hours that I've had this thing. Like, it's much easier to use than a previous generation. So sometimes it is the little things.
When you're talking about the boxy design of the Ultra, are the other ones, so we've got the S23, the S23 Plus, is it?
Correct.
And then the Ultra. Are the reg variant and the Plus, are they more of a curved design, or is Samsung kind of bypassing the curvy display almost entirely here, which would be my preference?
Yeah, so I believe that those are a flatter thing. I only have the Ultra in hand. I don't have the other two, and I didn't spend an awful lot of time with the other two on the show floor, just because it's just not really my beat. But my perception was that, yes, they were all pretty flattened out.
Good. I think that's a good approach. And especially if you're using the S Pen, right? You don't want the side of the screen to drop off. You want to be precise with that little digital pen.
Absolutely you do, yeah. Which is, it's a shame. They took the custom color off of the pens this year. I think they took it off last year. They're all black, but they do have a little, the clicky bit on the end matches the whatever color of the rails you get.
Okay. All right. So there was a big focus. In fact, I think the first 20 minutes of the hour-long presentation, which is about 2/3 of the presentation around the phone, were all dedicated to the camera system. We knew this a little bit in advance, that Samsung really was going to put high emphasis on the improvements that they're making in photography and videography. And of course, when I think of both of those things, I do think of you, because you highly, the stuff that you produce on YouTube and online is of high quality. So, you're right up there with the Hollywood film directors that they brought in for their presentation to say, hey, they're shooting their stuff on these phones as well. What do you think of the upgrades to the camera system?
Yeah, you heard it here first, folks. Mr. Mobile is Ridley Scott. Thanks, Jason.
There you go. I appreciate that. Happy to put that in there.
The technical upgrades to the camera this year are impressive, but one thing that I think a lot of us have been hoping for over the years, and by a lot of us, I mean a lot of tech YouTubers who like to shoot on mobile and regular YouTubers, is an Android device that can replace the iPhone. Because no matter how many Android phones I have on my desk, and there are 4 right now just on this trip, I always have to have an iPhone with me because it is superior in mobile videography, if not necessarily photography. And it was very clear to me when I started seeing the leaks and started learning about the S23 line and the Ultra that Samsung is really coming hard for that and trying to close that gap. So, yes, we can talk about the camera system itself, but the video specific enhancements to noise reduction and particularly optical image stabilization, where Samsung is implementing this wider OIS now, which should let you actually run with the device and track a subject. I have done this. I've asked somebody to run ahead of me on the sidewalk, and I just followed him, recording in video in low light. And the performance is stunning compared to what would have happened last year. I haven't done a side-by-side with the iPhone, but it's very encouraging. Keep in mind, I've been saying this every year. I get a day in, I'm like, is this the phone? Is this the one that's going to let me keep the iPhone at home? But it hasn't happened yet. So this gives me more hope than anything has recently that will finally.
Yeah, and Samsung's done pretty well to date in recent years when it comes to video recorded on these devices. Certainly, in the years where we were talking about the Pixel camera being the best camera, best Android camera, possibly the best mobile camera and everything, video was always left out of that conversation. Google really was never nailing the video side of things. I've thought in the past 2 or 3 years that Samsung video goes toe to toe with most anything that I've experienced elsewhere, but I haven't had a huge amount of time with the iPhone. So, and I realize that that's kind of like the cream of the crop as far as that's concerned. So I'm hopeful.
For sure.
Yeah, as far as mobile video, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, no question. I mean, there are these little I don't know, idiosyncrasies to Samsung cameras when you're shooting video. For years, we've had this stabilization problem where even though the image is stabilized, if you're walking or something, you'll see lights that reflect internally on the lenses, these weird little artifacts that happen. And this looks to address a lot of those. I mean, Samsung straight out called them out in a lot of the briefings. They're like, yep, we fixed this, we fixed this, we fixed this. So, I mean, they seem pretty confident, and that's, refreshing and exciting in an otherwise very iterative device. They're clearly taking the camera very seriously.
Now, another big change that's happening with not just the Ultra, but the whole lineup of S23 devices is that we're no longer seeing the Exynos, Samsung's internally built Exynos chips powering the overseas versions of these phones. It's Snapdragon all the way, at least for now. I couldn't tell, in my reading up on this and everything, whether that's just a change for the future or it's just like this year we've determined that Snapdragon is the right fit for everyone. What is your take on that? Does that really, is this really a difference that anyone as a user is going to notice, when they're using this phone? What do you think?
Certainly in markets that previously would have had Samsung Exynos processors powering variants, because Samsung, you're absolutely right. They used to do in other markets that were not the US predominantly, they would sometimes offer the same exact device with a different CPU, their own Exynos, homegrown solution. And that performance was almost exclusively, inevitably poorer. The phones heated up faster, they throttled faster, So in those markets, now that they were signing petitions. I think it was Ars Technica that called this out, that users were actually starting grassroots efforts to force Samsung to ship, to offer Snapdragon powered devices in those markets. So yeah, I think those people are going to see a big improvement. Also, this is not just the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, it's the 8 Gen 2 for Galaxy. So what does that represent? It's like a 200 megahertz overclocking on the CPU, and the GPU is boosted to, I don't know, we'll see how it compares.
They're taking it to
other
11 is what they're doing.
Yeah, right. But more interesting to me, more informative, and this is one of the only things you get out of going to a tech event or watching it streamed, even though you've been briefed on everything ahead of time, is you see how serious a company is about its partners. They brought up Cristiano Amon, the CEO of Qualcomm, up on stage, and they had I don't want to say 100 people, but they had an awful lot of Qualcomm people there along with him. It seemed to be a very big rededication to that partnership, which I don't think they would have done if this was just going to be a 1-year thing and next year they were going to go back to using Exynos in their high-end phones.
That's a really great distinction to point out. I hadn't really made that connection. If they're bringing them up on stage, it probably represents more than just like a last minute, like, we wanted to use Exynos, but we realized we probably shouldn't this time around, but we'll get back to it. Although there have been murmurings that Samsung is working on its own chip a la Tensor, to kind of focus on onboard AI processing and stuff. So I don't know how that lines up with, an Exynos or a non-Exynos future for Galaxy phones, but or even when that might happen. But it really does. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It kind of seems like maybe it's Qualcomm for the near term, and we'll see what happens longer term.
Yeah. They also had Google on stage too, so there was that. They reinforced that relationship as well. Which for any of us who lived through the Galaxy S5 period, where it was like, God, Samsung and Android are really not getting along here.
Yes.
It's nice to see everybody being friends again.
That was about the time where we started to realize, wait a minute, they can go through an entire event, talk about this phone top to bottom, and never once say the word Android. How did that happen? I don't even know that Android as a word was spoken more than maybe once or twice yesterday. It's still very, very minimal.
Absolutely. Yeah. You're still buying a Galaxy after all, right?
That's right. And most people are, Samsung is the competitor to Apple when we're talking about mobile phone makers. At least here in the US, it really seems like Samsung has the grip along with Apple. Google is distant down the road, even though they created the OS. It's a Samsung Android universe here in the US. Elsewhere, I realize outside of the US, those dynamics shift around and they change a little bit. But Samsung's powerful. We haven't even touched on the laptops, but we don't need to go there. We've run out of time, Michael. I really appreciate you taking some time to talk to us about the Ultra and the S23 lineup. And I want to make sure that people know where to find your coverage of this, because I'm sure you're going to be doing full coverage of these devices. What do you want people to know?
I sure will. I'm going to run a full review at the Mr. Mobile YouTube channel. It's THEMRMOBILE, the Mr. Mobile on YouTube. And that'll take a week or 10 days. I'm going to take my time with this and relearn everything I used to know about cameras. In the meantime, I'll be tweeting about it at Captain2Phones on Twitter. Captain, the number 2 phones.
Right on. Michael, always a pleasure to get the chance to talk with you. Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Likewise. Thank you for having me very much, Jason. And hopefully we do this again soon.
Absolutely. We will talk to you soon.
Tech Break is brought to you by ACI Learning. ACI Learning proudly announces that IT Pro, formerly IT Pro TV, joins its family. With IT Pro, ACI Learning will expand its reach and production capabilities, offering companies the content and learning modes they need at any stage of their development. Visit ACIlearning.com and let ACI power up your IT team.